Every telling of this story has Cain say, "Let us go out to the field." The Hebrew does not. Genesis 4 leaves two holes. That one, and the reason God turned Cain down. We filled in both. That is not an accusation. It is close to unavoidable. A gap in the middle of a story is one of the least bearable things a person can look at. And this chapter has more than one of them. But I want to show you the small gap first, because the small one can be proved. Once you have watched us fill a hole in Genesis 4 with your own eyes, the big hole starts to read differently. So here is where we are going. A blank space on a Hebrew page. One sentence that 4 ancient translations agree on. 2 brothers standing in a field, and an old man who crossed his hands on purpose and would not let anybody straighten them. And here is the claim. Everything after this is evidence for it. We did not find the reason. We wrote one in. Start with verse 8, because almost nobody has looked at it closely. Open a King James Bible to Genesis chapter 4. Verse 8 reads, "And Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass, when they were in the field, that Cain rose up against Abel his brother, and slew him." Read that first clause again. Cain talked with Abel his brother. Talked about what? The Hebrew is stranger than the English. The Hebrew verb there is not a general word for conversation. It is the ordinary verb for saying something, the one that almost always introduces a quotation. In Hebrew, the sentence runs, "And Cain said to Abel his brother," and then it stops. The quotation marks open, and nothing comes out of them. The next words are about a field and a body. Now open a New International Version. Same verse. "Now Cain said to his brother Abel, 'Let's go out to the field.'" Those words are not in the Hebrew. I want to be careful here, because this is the kind of sentence that gets clipped and passed around wrongly. I am not telling you somebody tampered with your Bible. I am telling you something narrower and, I think, more interesting. The Hebrew manuscripts of Genesis do not contain a quotation in verse 8. Several other ancient copies of Genesis, in other languages, do. 4 of them, to be exact, and you can name all 4. Start with the Samaritan Pentateuch. It is the version of the first 5 books kept by the Samaritan community, the same people you meet at a well in John chapter 4. They have preserved their own text of Moses for over 2,000 years. It has the sentence, "Then the Septuagint." That is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures, made in Egypt a couple of centuries before Christ. It is the Bible most of the New Testament writers were quoting. It has the sentence. The Syriac Peshitta, the Bible of the Aramaic-speaking churches of the East, the closest surviving cousin to the language Jesus spoke at home. It has the sentence. And the Latin Vulgate, Jerome's translation, finished around the year 400, the Bible of Western Europe for 1,000 years. It has the sentence. 4 independent streams, 4 different languages, and they all supply the same missing line. Let us go out into the field. So which is it? Did the Hebrew lose a sentence, or did the other 4 add one? Scholars have argued this for centuries, and they have not settled it. The mainstream reading is that the phrase looks like a repair. It has the shape of something borrowed from the next clause, which already mentions the field, and dropped into the gap to smooth it over. But there is a real argument on the other side. A scribe's eye skips a line, and the Hebrew becomes the copy that lost something. I cannot tell you which. Nobody can tell you which with certainty. Anyone who tells you otherwise is selling you a tidiness that does not exist in the manuscripts. Here is what I can tell you, and it is the part that made me stop. In some Hebrew manuscripts, there is a space. Right there, in the middle of the verse, after, "And Cain said to Abel his brother," the scribes left a visible gap on the page before continuing. Hebrew scribal tradition has a name for a break in the middle of a verse, and this is one of the places it shows up. Now, scholars disagree about what that space means. Some read it as an old scribal signal that words were known to be missing. Others read it as a marker doing an entirely different job, a cross-reference of a kind we only partly understand. Hold it loosely. The point does not depend on solving it. The point is what those men did. They copied this chapter by hand. They counted its letters. They would not add a word to it. And at that spot they stopped and left the page empty. They looked at the hole and did not fill it. Almost everybody since has. And here is the part I actually want you to see. They did not all fill it the same way. There is an ancient Aramaic paraphrase of Genesis. It is the kind that was read aloud in synagogues for people whose Hebrew had gotten rusty. It comes to verse 8, sees the blank, and writes in a conversation. Not a walk to the field, an argument. In that version, Cain says to his brother, "There is no judgment, and there is no judge. There is no other world. There is no good reward given to the righteous." And Abel answers him, "There is no partiality in judgment." Sit with that for a second. Faced with a blank space in the first family in the Bible, the oldest interpreters we have did not write in directions to a field. They wrote in an argument about whether God plays favorites. Which is the exact argument you came here with. That is not proof of anything. It is an ancient reading, not the Hebrew text, and I am not going to pretend it is scripture. But it tells you how old the ache is. 2,000 years ago, somebody stood in front of this same silence and heard the same question coming out of it. He put it in Cain's mouth because it had to go somewhere. So the small hole is filled. 4 translations, 1 paraphrase, and about half the Bibles printed in English this year. Which raises the harder question. If we did that to the small gap, what did we do to the big one? Go back 4 verses. And in process of time it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto the Lord, and Abel he also brought of the firstlings of his flock, and of the fat thereof. And the Lord had respect unto Abel and to his offering, but unto Cain and to his offering he had not respect. Read it slowly, and look for the word, because. It is not there. And before we go any further, I want to say out loud the thing people think in this chapter, and do not say in Bible study, because it is the honest starting point, and pretending otherwise wastes both our time. It sounds something like this. If God will not say why he turned one of them down, how am I supposed to know he has not done the same to me and not said why either? That is the actual question under this chapter. It was never a question about agriculture. There is no clause in Genesis 4 that explains the decision. No, for Cain had withheld. No, because Abel's heart was right. The text puts 2 men in front of God, records which way God looked, and moves on to Cain's face. Now, most of us were handed a reason anyway. For a lot of people it was this one. Abel brought blood, Cain brought vegetables, and blood is what God requires. It is a tidy answer, and it has been preached in a great many rooms. The problem is the word the text uses for what they brought. Both gifts are called the same thing. The Hebrew is minchah. It is used for Cain's produce, in verse 3, and it is used for Abel's animal, in verse 4, and again in verse 5, the same noun both times. And minchah is not a technical term for a bloody sacrifice. When the law of Moses gets around to organizing worship, minchah is the word for the grain offering. Flour, oil, a handful burned on the altar. No animal anywhere near it. It is also the ordinary word for a gift brought to a superior. Jacob sends one to Esau. It shows up for tribute paid to kings. So the narrator had the whole Hebrew vocabulary of sacrifice available to him. He chose a word that covers a bag of grain as comfortably as it covers a lamb. Whatever separated these 2 gifts, the text will not put it in the name of the gifts. And notice what that costs us. If the difference had been something visible from outside, the right animal, the right ritual, the right list, then there would be a list, and you could check yourself against it. One word takes the list away. Whatever this chapter is about, it is not about getting the procedure right. There is a second thing in those two sentences, and it is easier to see in Hebrew word order than in English. The Lord had respect unto Abel and to his offering. Not to the offering and to Abel. The man comes first, and then the negative runs in exactly the same order. Unto Cain and to his offering he had not respect. Man first, gift second, both times, in a matched pair. The verb, by the way, means to gaze at something, to turn and look. It is not a courtroom word. Genesis does not say God rejected Cain. It says God did not look at him. Which is worse, if you have ever been the person not looked at. Now, there is one verse in this chapter where God comes closest to explaining himself. It is verse 7, and I have to be honest with you about it, because honesty is worth more than a neat answer here. Verse 7 is the hardest verse in the chapter to translate. Not difficult in the way a long sentence is difficult. Difficult in the way a torn page is difficult. Open 4 English Bibles to it, and you will get different verses. The King James asks, "If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted?" So does the English Standard Version. So does the New International. But the New American Standard renders that same clause, "If you do well, will your face not be cheerful?" That is not a different flavor of the same idea. Accepted by God and cheerful in the face. Those are two different sentences. Both are printed as scripture in Bibles sitting on shelves in your town. The second half splits the same way. The King James has sin's desire running toward Cain. Unto thee shall be his desire. The English Standard Version prints the opposite direction. Its desire is contrary to you. And underneath the English there is a grammar problem commentators have flagged for a very long time. The word for sin in that verse is feminine in Hebrew. The verb attached to it is masculine. So are the pronouns that follow. They do not agree with the noun they belong to. One old commentary calls it simply, "this most difficult verse." Another says, "the Hebrew here is probably damaged. Nobody has solved it. I am not going to pretend somebody has." So look at what that leaves us with. The one place in the chapter where God explains himself to Cain is the one verse the translators cannot agree on. And there is a further silence here that I had read past for years. Abel never speaks. Not one word. Not in Genesis 4, not anywhere. The brother who is accepted has no recorded voice in the entire Bible. The New Testament says of him that he being dead yet speaketh, and even there the thing that speaks is not Abel. It is his blood, crying from the ground, and that is God's line in verse 10, not Abel's. Stay with the New Testament for a second, because it gets a clean chance to close this. Hebrews chapter 11 runs through the heroes of faith, and it starts with this exact scene. By faith, Abel offered unto God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, by which he obtained witness that he was righteous. There it is, a writer, centuries later, holding the same story, with every reason to settle the argument in one clause. And read what he actually says. He tells you Abel's offering was better. He tells you it was offered by faith. He does not tell you what was wrong with Cain's. The New Testament looks straight into the whole, confirms that there is a difference, and still does not name it. So, no reason, an explanation verse nobody can read, no quotation, and no voice for the favored son. 4 holes in 16 verses. I do not think that is sloppiness. This is the most carefully copied text in human history, and its scribes left a physical space rather than improve it. I think this chapter is built to withhold. But it is not the only chapter in Genesis that does this, and this is where the thing stops being about Cain and starts being about the book. Genesis chooses one brother over another 4 separate times, and every single time, it declines to tell you why. Take Rebekah, 1 generation into the promise, pregnant with twins, and in enough pain to go looking for God about it. Genesis 25. And the children struggled together within her, and she said, If it be so, why am I thus? And she went to inquire of the Lord. That is a woman asking the question this whole video is about. Why is it like this? And God answers her. Look at what the answer contains. 2 nations are in thy womb, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. And the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. Read that again, and try to find the reason in it. You cannot, because it is not there. It is entirely outcome. This is what will happen. The younger will come out ahead of the older. And it is said before either boy has drawn breath, before either has done a single good or bad thing, before there is any conduct to weigh at all. If merit is the hinge of these stories, that verse should not exist. Rebekah asked why. She was told what. That is the pattern, and once you see it, you will see it everywhere in this book. Now the one that I think is the strongest, and it is the one almost nobody preaches. Jump to the very end of Genesis. Jacob is old and nearly blind and dying, and Joseph brings his 2 boys in to be blessed. Joseph, who has spent his life inside a family wrecked by favoritism, arranges his sons carefully. Manasseh, the firstborn, at his father's right hand. Ephraim, the younger, at the left. He has staged it correctly. He is trying to get one thing right. And Israel stretched out his right hand, and laid it upon Ephraim's head, who was the younger, and his left hand upon Manasseh's head, guiding his hands wittingly. For Manasseh was the firstborn. Guiding his hands wittingly, knowing what he was doing. The old man crossed his arms on purpose, and the narrator stops the scene to tell you it was on purpose. And then Joseph does the thing every one of us wants to do. And when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand upon the head of Ephraim, it displeased him, and he held up his father's hand, to remove it from Ephraim's head unto Manasseh's head. And Joseph said unto his father, Not so, my father, for this is the firstborn. Put thy right hand upon his head. He grabs his father's wrist. He physically tries to move the blessing back where it belongs. He says out loud the sentence that has been sitting in your chest for 40 years. Not so. This one is the firstborn. You have it the wrong way round. And his father refused, and said, I know it, my son. I know it. I know it. Twice. Not you have misunderstood. Not let me explain. Here is a dying man who is fully aware that he is doing the unfair thing. He is doing it deliberately. He tells his son that he already knows. And then he does not explain. That is the whole book in one gesture. Somebody tries to correct an unexplained preference, on camera, with his hands, and is told, I know, and still no reason comes. Maybe you have gone to the person who could have straightened it out. A parent, a boss, a pastor, and what you got back was some version of, I know, my son, I know, with nothing after it. If that has happened to you, you already understand this book better than most people who teach it. Now the third piece, and it cuts the other direction. Because Genesis is perfectly capable of giving you a reason for favoritism when it wants to. Twice it does exactly that, and both times you will wish it had kept quiet. Same chapter as Rebekah, 4 verses later. And Isaac loved Esau, because he did eat of his venison, but Rebekah loved Jacob. There is your because. A father preferred one son over the other, over cooked meat. That is the stated reason, in the text, with no embarrassment about it. And then Joseph's coat. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. Because he was the son of his old age. That is the entire explanation. Not character, not calling, not anything Joseph did. He was born late. That is it. So the reason exists in chapter 37. Everyone in the family can see it. It is walking around wearing it. Watch what having the reason does for them. And when his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him, and could not speak peaceably unto him. Knowing why did not cool it down. It gave the resentment somewhere to stand. And now hold Genesis 4 and Genesis 37 side by side, because the second one is the first one, with all the blanks filled in. In chapter 4 there is no reason given. In chapter 37, the reason is stated plainly in the 3rd verse. In chapter 4, the brothers' conversation is missing. In chapter 37, you get the dialogue in full. Behold, this dreamer cometh. Come now, therefore, and let us slay him, and cast him into some pit. In chapter 4, the location arrives with no explanation. Suddenly they are in a field. In chapter 37, Genesis walks you out there step by step. It even stops to tell you that a stranger found Joseph wandering in the field and asked him what he was looking for. Every hole that chapter 4 leaves open, chapter 37 fills. And it ends in the same place. A brother in a field. Brothers standing over him deciding. Blood on the ground in one story, and in the other, a coat dipped in goat's blood and carried home to fool a father. And in both, the man who asks what happened gets a lie. Cain says, I know not. Am I my brother's keeper? The brothers say, some evil beast hath devoured him. Same field, same blood, same lie. The reason changed nothing. That is the part I would want somebody to say to me, so I am going to say it plainly. For as long as you have carried this chapter, you have assumed the reason was the missing piece. One clause, one because. Add that, and the whole thing would sit right. Genesis calls that bluff in chapter 37. It hands a family the reason, spells it out, lets everyone see it, and the family destroys itself anyway. You were never one sentence away from peace about this. Which brings me back to verse 8, and to what we have all been doing there. We did not find the reason. We wrote one in. That is what happened in the manuscripts, and we can watch it happen. The Samaritans wrote in a walk to the field. The Greek translators in Egypt wrote in the same. Jerome wrote it in Latin. The Aramaic Paraphrase wrote in an argument about whether God is fair. Half the Bibles printed this year put it in the text, and half leave it out. The ones that leave it out are not more faithful. They are working from a different manuscript tradition, and they tell you so in a footnote you have never read. Nobody in that list was lying. They were doing what human beings do when they are handed a story with a piece missing. They supplied the piece. In good faith. Because a blank in the middle of a sentence is unbearable. And it is more unbearable when the sentence is about you. And that is what I think you have been doing for most of your life. Somewhere there was a room you were not chosen in. A brother who got the thing. A sister your mother lit up for in a way she never lit up for you. A job that went sideways to somebody with less claim on it than you had. And nobody ever told you why. So you did what the Samaritan scribes did. You filled in the blank yourself, because you could not leave it open. And here is the thing about the sentence you wrote in there. It was almost certainly about you. There must have been something in me. Something they could see and I could not. Some deficiency that explained the whole thing, sitting just out of view. That is not a memory. That is a reconstruction. You did not receive that sentence. You supplied it, into a gap, the way 4 ancient translations supplied theirs. And then you read it back to yourself for 30 years, as though it had been there all along. The gap is not a verdict. The gap is a gap. And notice what the chapter does after the silence, because it does not walk away. God turns straight to the man who was not looked at, and starts asking him questions. Whatever that silence was, it was not God leaving the room. But I am not going to hand you a tidy reason now either. I do not have one. This chapter has survived 4,000 years without one. What I can tell you is what the oldest copies do. In some of them, at the place where the sentence is missing, the scribe left a space. He had ink. He had the other versions circulating in his own century. He could have closed it in one stroke, and no one would have known. He left it open. You did not lose anything the day you were passed over that a because would have given back. You were handed a blank, and you have been holding it as a charge sheet. We did not find the reason. We wrote one in. You are allowed to leave it blank.